Fear whispers that staying still is safe, but staying still is the greatest risk of all. What you avoid today becomes what limits you tomorrow. Fear of losing keeps people stuck in patterns that quietly cost them far more over time. Chapter 3. Fear of losing and risk aversion. The psychology behind better save it versus invest in myself. At first glance, choosing between saving and investing appears to be a simple financial decision, one that can be easily solved with numbers, projections, or logical reasoning. Yet for most people, this choice is rarely logical. It is emotional. The phrase "better save it" is driven by one of the most powerful feelings in human psychology: the fear of losing. On the other hand, invest in myself requires a different emotional state: confidence, vision, and the willingness to embrace uncertainty for the sake of growth. The desire to save is deeply connected to a sense of safety. For many individuals, especially those who grew up in environments marked by scarcity or financial unpredictability, saving becomes more than a responsible habit. It becomes a form of protection. Money in the bank feels like a barrier between oneself and potential hardship. It offers emotional comfort, a sense of control, and relief from the anxiety of the unknown. In moments of uncertainty, the familiar instinct is to hold on tightly. Saving is not simply about preserving money, it is about preserving stability. Investing, however, triggers a different psychological response. Even when the numbers show long-term growth, even when the risk is calculated and minimal, investing introduces an element of vulnerability. It requires trusting the future, trusting oneself, and trusting the idea that growth often begins with temporary discomfort. For someone whose mind has been shaped by fear of loss, this vulnerability can feel overwhelming. The fear becomes louder than the opportunity. Logic collapses under the weight of emotion. The conflict between save and invest therefore reflects an inner dialogue between two emotional needs: the need for safety and the need for expansion. Both are valid, yet they often pull in opposite directions. A person may desperately want to grow, to create more opportunities, or to change their financial reality, yet still find themselves unable to take action because the emotional cost feels too high. The mind equates investing with danger, even when the true danger lies in not growing at all. Investing in oneself, whether through education, business, personal development, or financial instruments, requires an internal shift. It demands the ability to tolerate uncertainty, to see beyond immediate fears, and to believe that your future self is worth the risk. It is an act of self-trust. It says, "I am capable of growing. I am capable of handling challenges. I am capable of creating a better life." For many people, this belief is far more difficult to accept than any financial risk. This psychological struggle explains why some individuals save diligently but never progress. Saving alone cannot create transformation. It preserves what exists but does not expand it. Investing in yourself, when done with clarity and intention, is what opens doors to new income, new skills, and new opportunities. The challenge is that investing requires emotional courage, the courage to move from fear into possibility. Understanding this emotional battle is essential. It allows you to see that your hesitation is not a flaw. It is a reflection of your history, your conditioning, and your internal sense of safety. But recognizing this also empowers you to change. You can begin to shift your mindset from "what if I lose" to "what if I grow?" From "I need to protect myself" to "I trust myself to build something greater." The key is balance. Saving is valuable, but it should not become a barrier to progress. Investing is powerful, but it should not be reckless. When your emotional foundation is aligned with your goals, you learn to save with purpose and invest with intention. You no longer choose based on fear or impulse, you choose based on clarity. The psychology behind better save it versus invest in myself is ultimately the psychology of fear versus belief. When you understand this dynamic, you gain the ability to move toward growth without abandoning safety, and to build a financial life that reflects not only where you have been, but where you are capable of going. How fear of losing makes you lose more in the long run. Fear is one of the most influential forces in financial behavior. It protects us from danger, guides our instincts, and alerts us to potential risks. But when fear becomes the primary voice in our financial decisions, it often leads to outcomes far worse than the ones we were trying to avoid. The fear of losing, while understandable, can silently cause us to lose far more over time. People who fear losing money often try to protect themselves by avoiding risk altogether. They keep everything in savings, avoid investments, hesitate to pursue opportunities, and step back from anything that feels uncertain. On the surface, this appears responsible. It feels safe. It feels controlled. But beneath that sense of security lies an invisible cost: stagnation. When fear dictates your financial life, your progress slows dramatically. Savings alone cannot outpace inflation. It cannot multiply. It cannot open doors. It creates safety, yes, but safety without growth eventually becomes a form of limitation. Over the long term, the fear of losing prevents the very expansion that leads to freedom. This becomes even more evident when opportunities arise. A person driven by fear may see a chance to grow, learn, or invest, yet turn away because the possibility of loss feels heavier than the possibility of gain. The emotional weight of, "What if I fail?" overshadows the question, "What if this changes my life?" In this way, fear quietly steals opportunities long before they have the chance to appear. Another hidden cost of fear is the loss of time. Financial growth often works through compounding, small actions that multiply over long periods. When fear delays your decisions, you lose years of potential growth. You lose the momentum that only time can create. And while losses in investing are temporary, lost time cannot be recovered. Fear, without realizing it, becomes the most expensive choice you can make. Fear also encourages reactive behavior. Instead of making decisions based on strategy or long-term goals, a fearful mind responds to emotion. It may pull out of investments too early, avoid necessary changes, or cling to outdated habits simply because they feel familiar. These reactions rarely support financial success. They create a cycle of inconsistency, where progress is made in moments of confidence and undone in moments of fear. The most profound cost, however, is internal. When you operate from fear, you reinforce the belief that you cannot trust yourself. You begin to see uncertainty as danger instead of possibility. You become hesitant, doubtful, and cautious to a degree that limits your potential. Fear closes your world. It narrows your perspective. And over time, it shapes an identity rooted in avoidance rather than growth. But fear is not the enemy. It is a messenger. It signals where healing is needed, where confidence must be built, and where outdated beliefs still influence your choices. When you understand this, you can begin to work with your fear instead of against it. You can acknowledge it, examine it, and make decisions from clarity rather than emotion. The truth is simple. Avoiding risk does not eliminate loss. It often guarantees it. You may not lose money directly, but you lose time, opportunity, progress, and confidence. You lose the chance to build a life that reflects your true potential. The cost of fear is invisible, but it is real. The goal is not to eliminate fear, it is to lead despite it. When you develop emotional awareness, you begin to recognize when fear is protecting you and when it is holding you back. You learn to evaluate risks with intention, to invest with wisdom, and to take steps that align with your future rather than your fears. Over time, this shift transforms your financial life. You move from avoidance to possibility, from stagnation to growth. In the long run, fear of losing makes you lose far more than money. It makes you lose the life you could have built. But when you understand this truth, you reclaim the power to choose differently, to grow with intention, to invest in yourself, and to create a future guided not by fear but by purpose. Cognitive bias, loss aversion, Daniel Kahneman. One of the most influential ideas in behavioral psychology is Daniel Kahneman's concept of loss aversion. The observation that humans feel the pain of losing far more intensely than the pleasure of gaining. In simple terms, losing $100 hurts more than gaining $100 feels good. This emotional imbalance explains a large portion of why people avoid risk, hesitate to invest, or step back from opportunities that could improve their financial life. The mind is not neutral. It is wired to protect you from loss, even when that protection limits your growth. Loss aversion begins with a survival instinct. Throughout history, loss often meant danger, losing resources, losing stability, or losing safety. The human brain evolved to respond quickly and powerfully to threats. Because of this, the emotional reaction to potential loss is immediate, strong, and difficult to ignore. Even when the logical mind understands the benefits of a financial decision, the emotional mind may resist with surprising intensity. This bias becomes especially visible in financial choices. When someone considers investing, starting a business, or pursuing a new opportunity, their mind often focuses on what could go wrong rather than what could go right. The possibility of losing, even a small amount, feels more significant than the possibility of gaining much more. This emotional weight can overshadow logic, data, and long-term potential. The fear of loss becomes a barrier, not because the risk is large, but because the emotional response to risk feels overwhelming. Loss aversion also influences decisions after money is already invested. People may hold on to losing investments for too long because selling feels like admitting defeat. They may exit profitable opportunities too early because they fear losing the gains they have already made. Others refuse to explore new paths or rethink old habits because change itself feels risky. The emotional discomfort associated with loss becomes more powerful than the rational evaluation of what will create long-term success. This bias is not a sign of weakness. It is part of being human. Every person experiences it to some degree. The key is recognizing it. When you understand that your instinctive fear of loss is often disproportionate to the actual risk, you gain the ability to evaluate decisions more clearly. You begin to distinguish between emotional reactions and thoughtful judgment. Chapter 7. Loss aversion also reveals a deeper truth about money. People are not afraid of losing money itself. They are afraid of what loss represents. Loss may trigger feelings of failure, insecurity, or lack of control. It may remind someone of past experiences when they felt vulnerable or unprotected. The emotional meaning behind the loss is far stronger than the numerical amount. This is why two people can face the same financial decision and respond in completely different ways. Each one carries a unique emotional history that shapes their perception of risk. Understanding loss aversion gives you the power to move beyond it. You can acknowledge the fear without allowing it to dictate your choices. You can evaluate opportunities based on long-term value rather than short-term discomfort. You can recognize that temporary losses are often part of growth and that avoiding all risk may lead to greater loss in the form of missed opportunities. The goal is not to eliminate the fear of loss. It is to lead through it with clarity and maturity. When you understand how your mind reacts to risk, you can build habits that support your future rather than protect your fears. You learn to embrace discomfort as part of progress. You learn to make decisions from intention rather than instinct. Loss aversion teaches an essential lesson. Fear may be loud, but it is not always accurate. When you quiet the instinct to avoid loss at all costs, you make space for choices that expand your life, your resources, and your potential. This is the foundation of emotional intelligence in finance, recognizing the mind's instinctive reactions and choosing a path aligned with your long-term vision rather than your immediate fear. Why people don't invest, even when they know saving isn't enough. It is one of the most common and puzzling contradictions in personal finance. People fully understand that saving alone will not secure their future, yet they still hesitate to invest. They know inflation diminishes the value of their savings. They know opportunities grow through investment. They know that long-term wealth requires more than simply storing money in an account. And still, they remain on the sidelines. This behavior is not rooted in ignorance. It is rooted in emotion. Imagine someone who has spent years saving carefully. Each deposit into their savings account brings a sense of accomplishment, reassurance, and safety. For them, the growing balance represents stability. It is visible, it is predictable, it is comforting. But investing introduces something saving does not: uncertainty. Even when the potential for growth is clear, the possibility of fluctuation feels like a threat. Saving is familiar. Investing requires trust. This emotional tension explains why knowledge alone does not lead to action. You can understand the logic of investing and still feel unable to take the step. The mind treats the possibility of temporary loss as something far more dangerous than the certainty of long-term stagnation. Emotion overrides logic. Fear becomes louder than strategy. For many people, the hesitation comes from their personal history. If they grew up in an environment where financial loss caused stress or conflict, investing may feel like repeating a painful experience. If they watched their parents struggle during economic downturns, volatility feels intolerable. Their subconscious links risk with instability, even if their current circumstances are different. The emotional memory is stronger than the rational opportunity. Others avoid investing because they fear losing what they have finally managed to save. To them, the money represents years of sacrifice, hard work, and discipline. The idea of exposing it to market fluctuations feels like placing their security on uncertain ground. They think, "What if I lose everything?" rather than, "What if I grow beyond anything I imagined?" Their emotional attachment to the past outweighs their vision for the future. Some individuals hesitate because investing challenges their identity. They may see themselves as not the kind of person who invests, believing that financial growth belongs to people with more knowledge, more confidence, or more resources. This internal limitation creates paralysis. They stay in the comfort of saving because it feels aligned with who they believe they are, not because it is the most beneficial path. Another powerful reason is the illusion of control. Saving provides the feeling of having full control over money. It sits safely in an account, untouched, stable. Investing, by contrast, requires releasing partial control to market forces, time, and uncertainty. Even when the risk is minimal, the emotional discomfort feels significant. To the fearful mind, perceived control is more valuable than actual growth. Ultimately, people do not avoid investing because they lack information. They avoid it because investing requires emotional courage. Courage to accept discomfort, trust the future, and believe in their ability to recover from fluctuations. They fear the temporary loss more than they value the long-term gain. Understanding this example highlights a deeper truth. Emotional barriers often hold people back far more than financial limitations. When you become aware of the emotions influencing your decisions, fear, attachment, identity, or the desire for control, you gain the power to move beyond them. You begin to make choices aligned with your goals rather than your fears. The path to financial growth is not blocked by a lack of knowledge. It is blocked by emotion. And once you learn to navigate that emotion with clarity and confidence, investing transforms from a source of fear into a source of possibility, a step toward the freedom and stability you are capable of creating. How to use fear as a compass instead of a brake. Fear is often misunderstood in the world of money. Most people see it as a signal to stop, withdraw, or protect themselves at all costs. But fear, when understood correctly, can become one of the most powerful tools for growth. It can serve as a compass, pointing not to danger, but to the areas where your greatest opportunities for expansion exist. The key is learning to interpret fear not as a warning to turn back, but as an invitation to look deeper. Fear appears whenever you approach the edge of your comfort zone. It emerges when you consider investing, taking a calculated risk, or pursuing something new. It arises not because these actions are harmful, but because they challenge your internal patterns built from past experiences, inherited beliefs, and emotional memories. Fear, therefore, is not a message that something is wrong. It is a message that something is unfamiliar. When you use fear as a brake, you allow it to dictate your behavior. You step back from opportunities, avoid decisions, and remain in familiar environments even when they no longer support your goals. This may feel safe in the moment, but over time, it limits your growth. You stay within the boundaries of what you already know, and your financial life reflects that limitation. But when you use fear as a compass, you take a different approach. You begin to ask, why is this fear showing up? What is it trying to protect? What belief is being challenged? What possibility lies beyond this discomfort? These questions turn fear into information that reveals where your greatest potential for growth resides. For example, if the idea of investing makes you uneasy, that fear may be pointing to areas where you need to build knowledge, confidence, or emotional resilience. The fear itself is not the barrier, the lack of clarity is. By understanding what triggers your fear, you can address the underlying belief instead of avoiding the opportunity. Similarly, if fear arises when you think about starting a project, taking a course, or changing careers, it may be signaling that you are standing at the edge of meaningful transformation. Fear appears strongest when you are closest to an important shift. Recognizing this allows you to move toward the discomfort rather than away from it. The fear becomes a guide, showing you exactly where growth is waiting. Using fear as a compass also requires developing the ability to pause. Instead of reacting impulsively, you learn to observe the feeling without judgment. You give yourself a moment to breathe, reflect, and evaluate the situation with clarity. This pause separates instinct from intention and gives you the power to choose your response consciously. Over time, This practice builds emotional strength. You begin to understand that fear is not the enemy. It is an ally. It highlights your blind spots, exposes outdated beliefs, and reveals where your confidence has room to grow. When you follow the direction fear points to, rather than running from it, you expand your capacity to handle uncertainty. You become more resilient, more strategic, and more capable of making decisions aligned with your future rather than your past. This shift transforms your financial life. Instead of avoiding investments, you learn to approach them with education and purpose. Instead of resisting change, you explore opportunities with curiosity. Instead of allowing fear to dictate your limitations, you allow it to illuminate your path. The goal is not to eliminate fear, but to reinterpret it. Fear becomes a teacher rather than a barrier, a guide rather than an obstacle. When you use fear as a compass, you open the door to growth that would otherwise remain hidden behind your comfort zone. In this way, fear becomes a powerful ally in your journey toward financial freedom. It reminds you that your future lies beyond the familiar, that expansion requires courage, and that the life you aspire to build begins where your fear begins to speak. By listening with wisdom instead of retreating with hesitation, you transform fear from a brake into a guide, one that leads you toward the opportunities that will shape your next level of success. Fear doesn't disappear. It's mastered. One of the greatest misconceptions in personal finance is the belief that fear must disappear before you can take meaningful action. Many people wait for the moment when they will finally feel confident enough, prepared enough, or emotionally ready to move forward. They imagine that financial courage is the absence of fear. But true freedom comes from understanding something far more realistic and far more empowering. Fear does not vanish. It is mastered. Every person, regardless of income, experience, or success, feels fear when facing uncertainty. Investors feel it when markets fluctuate. Entrepreneurs feel it when they launch something new. Savers feel it when they consider taking their first risk. Even individuals who appear confident have moments when doubt whispers in their mind. Fear is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of growth. It emerges whenever you move into unfamiliar territory. The difference between those who progress and those who remain stuck is not the disappearance of fear, but their relationship with it. People who grow financially do not wait for fear to fade. They learn to move forward while fear stands beside them. They understand that fear is a natural response, not a command. Instead of obeying it blindly, they listen, evaluate, and choose their path with intention. Mastering fear begins with recognition. When you acknowledge fear without judgment, you remove its power to control you. Instead of avoiding opportunities because fear appears, you observe the emotion, identify its source, and separate it from the decision itself. This creates the emotional space needed to act with clarity rather than instinct. Fear becomes a signal, not an obstacle. The next step is building tolerance. Each time you take action despite fear, you expand your capacity to handle uncertainty. You become more comfortable navigating discomfort, more resilient in the face of change, and more confident in your ability to adapt. This emotional strengthening does not eliminate fear. It transforms your relationship with it. You learn to interpret fear as evidence of growth rather than danger. Mastery also requires preparation. When you educate yourself, build supportive habits, and create clear strategies, fear loses its power to overwhelm you. Uncertainty becomes manageable. Risks become calculated rather than chaotic. Fear shrinks when clarity expands. And clarity grows through intentional action, not avoidance. Another important part of mastering fear is reframing it. Instead of seeing fear as a barrier, you begin to see it as a guide. Fear often appears at the threshold of your next level, when you are about to step into something greater, take on a new challenge, or make a decision that will change your life. In this sense, fear is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you are moving in the right direction. Growth rarely feels comfortable. It often begins with an elevated heart rate and an uncertain mind. Understanding that fear never disappears also brings peace. You stop waiting for the perfect emotional moment. You stop expecting yourself to feel flawless before taking action. You stop believing that confidence must come first. Instead, you learn a deeper truth. Action creates confidence, not the other way around. Each step forward reduces fear's intensity, not because fear leaves, but because you grow stronger. Mastery does not require eliminating fear. It requires leading yourself despite it. It is the calm acknowledgement that fear will walk with you, but it does not have to speak for you. It can be present without being in control. It can whisper without directing your steps. In the journey toward financial freedom, fear is not the enemy. It is part of the process. It shows up every time you expand, every time you evolve, and every time you reach for something beyond your current reality. Mastery lies in knowing that fear will always be there, but so will your capacity to rise above it. The future does not belong to those who feel no fear. It belongs to those who act with courage, clarity, and purpose, even while fear quietly follows behind them. If you believe this chapter could help someone, feel free to share it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe. Your support truly helps us keep creating more content like this.